Ladies, and gentlemen, welcome back. So imagine a wife saying, I've told him this 100 times, right? Now imagine the husband saying, she's never told me that. You didn't tell me, right? He didn't say, I did not hear you. He said, you didn't tell me, straight up, right? And now the question is that who is lying, right? Who is lying? Which one of them is lying? You see how that shock you, right? Who is lying between the two of them, right? Maybe neither of them. Just like you're confused for a second there, right? Maybe neither of them is lying because people don't just hear words, right? They hear meanings. That's the reality. They hear meanings. You see, I shared this one in our book, this particular story in our book, Once Upon a Time. Earlier on in our marriage, right? Lola was pregnant and she was scared. She asked me to stay home. I had like a boat ride that I wanted to go to. She couldn't go because of her condition, but she didn't want me to go. And what I heard was that you're trying to control me for whatever reason. Don't judge me yet, because I have something I want to share with you today. Okay, what I heard was you're trying to control me, but what she was really trying to say was, I need to feel safe with you, right? Well, I responded to the wrong message, right? Like most people. And later on, she accepted my apology, but that moment became a scar for years. And that's what happens when people hear words but miss the meaning. Who's lying? Whose fault is it? Right? Now, you might say, it's me, because what do you mean you're trying to control your pregnant wife? Well, what about, you're very quick to go to intentions. What about intentions, right? Well, clearly, in real life, intentions are overrated, and we're just lucky to still be here 20 years later, right? So again, I want to share something very important with you today. We're going to talk about why your partner stops listening to you in marriage. I've got stories, personal stories, clients, patterns that I've seen with our clients over the years that I want to share with you. But why, right? Why your partner stops listening to you. All right, I probably butchered that. I can't see it. Okay, good. That's what I want us to talk about today, because it's not just you. A lot of people feel this. They feel the same pain, right? And they probably can't necessarily put words to it. So we're going to spend some time talking about this today. Again, what you hear is not necessarily what the other person is saying. But what do you mean? Why can't they just say what they mean, right? When they mean what they say, so we can all know what we're dealing with. Well, if life was that easy, everybody would be winning, right? But the reality is that life is simple, but life is not necessarily easy. If you're trying to be one of the winners in life, you have to realize that there's more to this than just talking, right? Now, before we dive into today's breakdown, if your marriage is actively in a crisis state right now, I do have something that you take a look at, and you cannot afford to wait for these live streams, these breakdowns, this shalayes, and you can't wait for this piece by piece understanding. You don't have the patience for it. It's just thick right now. Just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery right now and book a one-on-one discovery session with me, so we can map out your exact scenario privately. All right, now let's get back into business. Why your partner stops listening to you. Like I said, if you look at every marital story, right, this is a very common thing. Okay, there's nothing really extraordinarily special about The idea that you say one thing but they hear something else. But when you are in it, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you might be married to your enemy. I know, right? I know you can relate with that suddenly, right? Married to your enemy. Well, that wasn't the plan, right? You didn't plan to marry to your enemy. Like, why would you get pregnant for a person? Well, why would you get pregnant together after having a societal wedding and suddenly they can't hear you when you're trying to feel safe? There's no justification for it, but we can also understand, because it's not just going to be when you're pregnant. This is something that might happen over and over again. Remember the patterns, right? Because again, previously in this episode, we've talked about defensiveness, we've talked about trust and all this kind of stuff, right? And you're starting to understand that there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. Now, the idea is not for you to start cramming and memorizing everything. The idea is for you to be able to internalize, be able to see some of these things subconsciously ahead of it becoming a conflict or someone checking out of a marriage. And when people check out of a marriage, there's always that one person that says, I didn't see it coming. Well, that becomes real, right? So why did your partner stop listening to you? Right? Is it intentional? Are they just being evil? Yeah? Did they just want to be wicked to you? Right? Well, if you've concluded that's your situation, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay? I'm sorry to hear that's your situation, but usually this is what happens in those relationships. All right. It starts, shout out to Dr. J 1999. It usually starts as words, guys. It starts as words. All right. You're just talking, good intentions, no hurt, no hard feelings, no hurts, nobody with the intention to hurt another person. Right. So yeah, just words, just having a conversation. No big deal. Right? No big deal. Right? It starts with word. But when it starts with word, this is what most people think. Right? This is what most people think. We're going to go here and we're going to put what people think. What you likely thought was happening, right? What you think. All right? And then we're going to debunk it. This is what you think, right? It starts with words. And then from words, it leads to, oh, you're thinking, okay, they're listening, right? Especially when you're still in love, right? They're listening. Yes? This is what you think. Feel free to tell me in the chat, okay? What you normally thought was happening. You know, on a good day, if you haven't really seen Shege, if you haven't seen, if you haven't perceived a cold-hearted spouse, wife or husband, you think they are listening. What happens next? Idealistic, right? Fantasies in your head, right? What happens? Well, you think they listened to you, and then you think, thank you, Dr. J, I appreciate that. She said she subscribed. Yay, I appreciate that. All right, she or he, I'm not sure. Feel free to share with me if you're a she or he. Right? What do we think? We think the next thing, they understand. We think, oh, they must understand. Yeah? Words, they're listening, they understand. This is all fantasies, right? And if you're saying something, you're trying to get them to understand, right? You're trying to create what? Some kind of change, even if it's just a change of state. This is what I said. Now they learn something new, right? So ideally in your head, we're still talking idealistically, right? Ideally in your head, you're thinking, well, that led to some type of change. Oh, they changed. It's beautiful, right? And change, ideally in your head, is also green. Green leads happy ever after. Well, is that really what happens? If that's really what happens, if that was true, right? One conversation would fix most marriages. You know how people just have conversations. You know, everybody's just fantasizing away. Just have conversations. Yeah. Yeah. Just talk. I understand. No, just talk. I listen. I understand. And then the desired change. If that was what was happening, everybody will be happy in their marriage. Everybody will live happily ever after. We won't have 50+% divorce rates, and probably more people, not probably, definitely more people living in bad marriages. Right? But that's not how it plays out, right? Let me show you exactly how it plays out. This is actually what happens. Okay, let's label this properly. What actually happens? And I hate to tell you, what usually happens is red. It's not something we're celebrating. It's just the reality, right? But we're showing it so you can actually, you know, humble yourself and know that, hey, number one, it's not just you. If it's happened to you, it's happened to the best of us, right? No matter how perfect you think you are, no matter how good intentioned you think you are, remember, most of us, we've gone through that good intention thing, right? If you're brand new here, go back and watch all those episodes, guys. There's only a few of them so far. They're going to pile up more. All right? They're going to pile up more. Let's see here. Wait, what? What are you doing? What are you doing, man? How are we doing here? Yeah. So we've talked about not chasing your partner, because that's not what creates attraction. We talked about stop playing the detective. We've talked about how good intentions end up in the mud. Most times, good intentions are overrated. We've talked about defensiveness. We've talked about why you keep having the same fights. Talked about how to rebuild trust. We've talked about, you know, safety, right? And now we're talking about why people stop listening to you. Let's see. Can you guys still hear me? If you can still hear me, please let me know. I think there was a disconnect for a quick. Rosalind says they hate me. Can you hear me, Rosalind? Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear, please. Thank you. I think I should be fine. There might be a disconnect, a quick disconnect. Just make sure. Oh, I could just check from here. Let's see. All right, so I think we're good. I'm just gonna get into what actually happens. Okay, so what actually happens is it's not just words. A message is being initiated, right? So we're not gonna call it words. This is what actually happens. A message. Yeah, and a message now. The first thing that happens once you send a message, you have two people involved, right? And usually there's two people involved, and the message is being sent. Somebody said, hey, we're talking about communications. Yes, precisely. Okay, we're talking about communication, because if you're trying to get someone to listen to you, when people say I feel unheard, right? When they use the word I feel unheard, right? This is what they're trying to say. A message was being sent, but they don't feel like you're listening. But this is actually what happens. That message turns into some type of interpretation. Yes. All right. So now the interpretation leads into no, not listening and understanding. Not yet. Probably never. Right. It leads into emotion, guys. Emotions. People, your emotions are always involved. Fortunately, because that's a good thing. That shows that you're a human. Right. This is really what happens, guys. It's never a situation where, oh, you just listen, you understand, and then everybody's. In fact, that's actually boring if you ask me. Okay, I think that's boring personally if you ask me. Okay, so now from emotions, what happens? Let's go here. Let's go down here. Make it much more fun, right? What happens when you mix in emotions? Somebody said, remove your emotions. Let's not be emotional. Can we please remove emotions from this? There's no such thing. It doesn't exist, guys. Stop trying to do that. That's a defeatist loser's strategy. Okay, you're always going to lose trying to remove emotions. It's not going to happen. I'll tell you right now. Right? What's going to happen is that they're going to mix their emotions, their interpretation with your message, and they're going to create a meaning. They're going to create their own meaning. Wait, from message to meaning? Yes, the meaning, there's a good chance their meaning is going to be far from from what your intentions was. You're good old perfect human being, a good person, a good husband, a good wife. You meant no harm. Yes, the meaning they put on your message might just be different, right? Might just violate what your intentions was. Ouch, I know. Yes, this is a marriage. Yes, this is a marriage where they have kids, and this is a very dangerous thing to happen. Yes, this is why people are ending up, their marriages are ending up in a ditch, guys. So what happens after they put their meaning? Well, they're not just going to receive it. Remember the idealistic, they understand and just change, right? No, that's not what's going to happen, because now the meaning has changed, meaning has transformed. They're going to have a pushback. Well, let's not call it a pushback. We'll call it, yeah, it starts to deteriorate, guys. It starts to deteriorate. It's going to be a reaction, right? That reaction, you might say, well, they're responsible for, well, that reaction is also going to affect your world. You're right. You are responsible for the reactions. The reactions, your reactions are actions you're responsible for. That's true. That's true to a very large extent. But nonetheless, you're in a relationship with this person. You're in a marriage with this person. So that also affects you. So what happens after the reaction, guys? What happens? Yeah, it even deteriorates probably even further. What happens? Well, you have a conflict. Okay? You have a conflict. Now, this might not happen. If you're lucky enough, it might not happen until 2 years or later in your marriage. In the beginning, it almost never happened because you're in love. Everybody's in love. Everybody's happy. Honky-dory, you know. Yeah, it leads to a big old conflict. The message was supposed to be, came from a good place of intention. So what was the issue? What happened? Well, all those things happened behind the scenes. Their interpretation is going to be controlled by their trauma, where they're coming from, how they were raised, how they see life, their personality, their temperament, right? Their attachment, theory, style, all that kind of stuff, right? All the different theoretical framework you can think of, all that is going to happen. And all the while, you had good intentions. All you were doing is sending a message. All you were trying to do is have a conversation. You were just communicating. Yeah? That's all you were doing. But somehow, it led us to this place. Yeah? Not good. Not good. Now, I've worked with wives, I work with husbands, and I work with many people. You will hear many different phrases that describes what we're talking about. Let's go through some of those examples before we continue to what actually happens behind the scene, right? You might have heard things like, he cuts me off. You ever heard that before? He cuts me off mid sentence. You ever heard those things before? Of course you have. Maybe that was you. Yeah. He cuts me off. What does that mean? He cuts me off. Well, he cuts you off because they probably got defensive mid-sentence. We're going to talk about defensiveness here in a second, right? He cuts me off. What about he minimizes what I say? What about that? He minimizes. Minimizes what I have to say. What I have to say. What about that? You ever felt that way? If you haven't felt that way, your partner might have felt that way, right? You've heard these things before. You've heard maybe your friends, right? What about people that walk away? He walks away. You're having a conversation. He just shies away from hard conversations. You don't see it as hard. You just see it as necessity. When you're married to a person, you should be able to have conversations, right? Even if it's hard sometimes, it's for the betterment of everybody, right? So we can grow. Well, they don't see it that way. They shut down, right? Their emotions are involved. Their interpretations are now involved, and then they shut down, right? What about this one, right? He says, I'm overreacting. He says, that's even if you're cognizant at all of what's happening with the other person. If you're even given any ounce of listening at all, he says, I'm overreacting. Yeah? What about that? This is the real life, right? This is the real world. But when I hear some of these things, when I listen closely, right? That's my job. The issue is not only that he doesn't hear her words. That's not what's happening, right? There's more to that, right? He actually doesn't understand the emotional meaning under those words, right? He probably also doesn't have the capacity to even hear you, right? Because most people, they barely have 2 hours worth of learning this stuff before they get into a marriage. They probably know everything about a wedding or budgeting a wedding, but not necessarily marriage. They're using common sense. You're supposed to listen. You're supposed to just trust me. You're supposed to just love me. You hear a lot of you're supposed to, right? But no knowledge around the reality of how these things play out. Okay? That's typically what's going on, guys. That's why people are struggling. Okay? So, what I've noticed in the pattern with my clients from all these different stories is a wife would feel unheard, right? Feelings, right? They feel dismissed, right? They feel interrupted, meaning they can't get again. Just think of a prison yard. There are men who also feel this way, by the way. They don't feel prioritized, right? And a husband might, maybe good intentioned person, right? Yeah. In fact, he believed he was trying to make her happy. If you know that Will Smith story, right? You believe you're trying to make her happy, but he can't see the reactions for what they are, right? He can't see that far, right? He struggled to see how his reactions contributed to the conflict. The reactions might even be just in an instant, he doesn't mean no harm, but then he went past that and then he went ahead to continue to do what he's supposed to do. But that reaction might actually sow a seed of resentment long term. All right. So now I want to get into what I call the communication filter. Let's get through communication filter real quick. Okay. So there's something called filter. We kind of described it a little bit when I said emotions and interpretations leading to meanings that's now far from the actual message. So the communication filter. Communication filter. Yep, the communication filter. All right, so the communication filter starts with your words, right? Your words. I mean, we do a lot of talking. Let's be honest, right? Your words starts with your words. So now, after your words, that leads to what? Anybody want to guess? Anybody want to give it a good shot? Your words lead to, now we're in real life, guys. We're no longer fantasizing, right? Your words leads to, this one you will probably never get properly, right? It leads to their history. If you notice earlier on, I mentioned their trauma, what they've gone through, how they were raised, right? So whenever you say what you said, don't just assume that it's just words that you know, like that, the common sense stuff. Just stay away from that, okay? You should have common sense. That's good enough for you to be a human being living by yourself. When it comes to marriage, you need a little bit more. Their history leads to their current emotion. Okay, their current. Hold on 1 second, guys. It leads to, sorry, I was making sure that there's no background noise. Their current emotions. It leads to their current emotions. All right, so emotions don't fall out of the skies. You know, even babies, when they're born, they're not born with all this information that we have in our head. It's usually stuff, you know, life experiences done a number on all of us, right? So now it leads to their current emotions. All of this started with, you said one or two things, you meant no harm. Again, that's why I always say, don't worry about fault. You don't need to worry about fault, who's right, who's wrong, or, you know, all these anti-seducers that you bring into a romantic relationship. They're doing more harms than. So at what point do you call out what's wrong? You will know, but you need to understand this first. Okay, because sometimes, yes, you do have to call out what's wrong for what is wrong, right? So what next after their current emotion? Now you have to deal with their ego. Their ego, guys. Their ego gets provoked. And the ego is, you can add fear into this, okay? The ego gets provoked. Wait, ego? How do we go from current emotions to the ego? But again, if it poses a form of a threat, if it comes off as a threat, yes, potentially you can find yourself dealing with a person's ego and having to manage that ego. Well, in all of that, you have your own emotions to also worry about. Well, not intentionally, but it's happening, you know, behind the scenes, right? So the ego, right? That leads to the meaning that they actually hear. Okay, let's go here. That leads to the meaning. Now they create a meaning. This is the emotional filter. This is all the stuff will filter. Your words will go through all of this filter. Okay, so the meaning they hear is not necessarily what you intend. Meaning they hear. It's not necessarily what your intentions are. Look, what I'm teaching you right now is a universal roadmap, okay? And every marriage has its own unique hidden landmines. If you want me to look directly at your specific relationship blocks, right? You want to go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. All right. You want to go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. The link is also pinned into the description, into the comment, and secure one of the discovery slots available this week. Okay, some of you are realizing that it's not communication. That's not the actual issue. The issue is identifying the pattern that is actually destroying your marriage. That's exactly what we do in the discovery session. All right, so let's keep going. Why your partner stops listening to you in marriage. The communication filter is a real thing, guys. It doesn't always show. So now the meaning that they hear will determine what? To determine the response that you get. And sometimes we call that what? We call that reaction, right? But let's spell it out, guys. Let's spell it out. The response that you get. The response you get. So, and that's usually not a positive thing, especially if you're not aware. If you're operating from a place of lack of awareness, yeah, it's usually not a good thing. Are you learning? Are you getting this, guys? You get it? You get it? Now let's do a quick review of what we're talking about, right? So words, listening, understand, fantasies. That's not how it works in real life, guys. This is false. It doesn't work like that, right? But this is what we think, at least when we're in love, when everything is good. But what actually happens is that interpretations happens, emotions get involved, new meanings are created, it creates reaction, and then usually conflict, right? And then you have, for more understanding, you have the communication filter. You said what you said. Sometimes it's just your silence. Your silence is a form of communication. Your shutdowns, your malice keeper, you're just trying to protect yourself. You rather have that conversation tomorrow. Well, either you know it or not, a message is being passed. And then when you mix that together with their history, the current emotions are created, the ego gets tested. It's like threat, fear, right? And then the meaning they hear comes from all of that, right? Now, very far from what your utterances or lack thereof is. And then you get a certain type of response. Yeah. And especially if you're not aware, if you're not operating from a place of self-awareness, you'll miss that. Now, next, what I want to do is I want to show you the cost of this in marriages. This is a very costly thing that happens. I want to show you the communication death spiral and the cost. This is it's crazy. Let's see. The communication. Nah, this is definitely the communication death spiral and the cost. All right, so a lot of these patterns, they don't just stay that way. It's either you're dying or you're living. It's either you are growing, right, or it's dying. The same thing with the marriage. There's no, we're just stagnant, that's usually a ticking time bomb. There's no, we're just stagnant, it's just there. Some people are just happy with their marriage like that. No, something is dying. Sometimes it might be as complicated as your legacy. Your children are learning the wrong way to live life. Minimum at best. So we definitely don't want to be saying these justifiable things that make us feel better about these terrible situations, right? So now we've talked about everything, right? But now you get into a place, remember that example I gave you, right? Where a wife might say, I feel unheard, right? So let's use that as the trigger in this death spiral loop, okay? I feel unheard. Typically, traditional men will say, what is that? What do you mean? Feel heard, unheard? What is that? All this terminology, westernized terminology is nonsense. Okay? If that makes you feel better, sure. Right? So I feel unheard. Let's just call it this, right? So what does that lead into? Because we wish, I mean, if it was as simple as saying that, we just say that, right? But let me do this 1 second. It's too long. Because I'm gonna need a little bit more space. Guys, Shogulayeni, I know, right? but this is the reality, guys. This is what, if life was as simple as just everybody have good intention and everything is all good, then but it starts with I feel unheard, or every version of that, right? I gave you some examples earlier on. I feel unheard. He minimizes what I have to say. He walks away. She says I'm overreacting. She says I talk too much. All those little things that we say to ourselves. Not only are they just verbal abuse, but they sow seeds of resentment and what I call the communication death spiral. Because eventually, people don't feel safe to even express themselves to you, and all the while you thought, hey, it's just live, right? Now, if somebody say, I feel unheard, what does that lead to? If you feel unheard and you're still living in this marriage with this person, well, you're definitely going to feel the need to repeat yourself. I repeat myself. Yeah? You're going to repeat yourself because you're not a mad person. You're going to try to repeat yourself a couple of times at least, maybe for the next 8 years. Yeah, you repeat yourself, so hopefully this time around they can hear you, right? Okay, if you repeat yourself, what happens next? Repeat yourself, they're supposed to now hear you, right? Yeah, right. If you repeat yourself and they don't hear you, if you already know that each one of these cycles is essentially, remember what we covered earlier on, right? Hi, Alex. If you repeat yourself, and each one of this will create, let me show you. We'll go through the communication filter, we'll go through what actually happens, interpretation, emotions, new meanings, reaction, all of this potential. Each one of these cells are creating a conflict at the end of it, right? But okay, you're still living in this marriage, so you're still trying to do the right thing. You're giving them new chances, right? You're giving them a new opportunity for them to actually understand you. But hey, it doesn't happen. Let's be honest. Usually it doesn't happen. So what happened? You get louder. So I get louder. I get louder. Yes, I get louder. Somebody say, yeah, these things are not that complicated. Whenever I say it in words, I say, okay, all right, maybe we need to start breaking these things down. And here we are, guys. Morning Prestige Live. Welcome. Share this with everybody that will benefit from it. Everyone will benefit from it, in my opinion. My humble opinion. What happens after you get louder, guys? You get louder. Well, let's stop with you for a second now. Let's move on to what happens on the other side. What happens on the other side is that it starts to sound like criticism. It sounds like, let me put this on the first line. It sounds like criticism. Yes? So what do we know about criticism? It's one of the predictors. It's one of the 4 greatest predictors of divorce, right? If you have enough criticism going on in your marriage, yes, it will definitely go towards divorce. This is moving more in the, well, we're talking about the communication death spiral, right? So this is going to spiral completely out of control, as you can probably already imagine. Hopefully you're getting this so you can stop it, right? Somebody has to stop this cycle. What happens after criticism? Well, naturally, like You're not crazy, it's just natural life, right? But what happens with the other person, they get more defensive. They get defensive, guys. Okay? Because they're not as bad as you're painting it to be. At least that's what their mind is saying. Because honestly, let's be honest, if they were that bad, you probably won't be married to them. But you don't you're definitely feeling that they've been bad. Right? I feel unheard, I repeat myself, I get louder. It sounds like criticism, they get defensive. Yeah. What else? Let's go to the next line. What happened here? Wait now. Aha. Somebody's like, you're a terrible artist, Ola. Okay, whatever, man. Whatever. So what happens after they get defensive? Yeah. Well, for one, they're not going to be able to listen, right? They stop listening. Well, you can also describe that as they hear less, right? So let's put both of them there, right? They hear less. They stop listening. This is why, guys, this is why your partner stop listening to you. It's not necessarily intentional. It's just the natural order of things when people don't know what they're doing, when people don't feel the need to educate themselves on this thing called marriage. When people feel like, hey, you're just supposed to behave right because you are supposed to be a good person, right? Yeah. That's not how that works. That's fantasies. Just like in any other institutions in the world, you can't just jump in there and think that you're supposed to just know. That's not how that works, guys. Okay? They stop listening, and when they stop listening, that creates, now we're getting to what you should be familiar with right now if you've been paying attention during this series. That creates emotional distance, guys. That creates emotional distance. It creates resentment. I'm going to put that back to back to back to back to back. Emotional distance, and that leads to resentment. Resentment. Let's move on to the next line. How's that? I know it's a long process. Well, we're talking about people's lives, marriages here, right? So that leads to resentment. And you would think, okay, that's the end of it, right? Okay, resentment. Can we just go back to life? No. Unfortunately, no, because there's more to this. Remember, we're talking about this death spiral, right? And the cost, right? It leads to resentment. All of this is happening behind the scenes. All of this can happen in 2 minutes. Right? So imagine what can happen in a 2 hours toxic argument. Just imagine what can happen. After resentment, what happens? Right? Well, people feel more unheard. So, if they're resentful, right? Or either side of being resentful, it not only does this loop back, it loops back to feeling more unheard, right? It leads to that, but if you keep this cycle, this bad spiral cycle will cost a lot. Okay, so we know that it's going to cost potentially divorce. We already know that that's the obvious part. Actually, the worst ones are people that get stuck in bad marriages. They can't divorce. They can't move on. They don't feel like they should move on. They don't feel empowered enough to move on. They don't have the capacity to move on. So it's not as simple as just move on, right? So when you continue to feel unheard, we know that it's going to lead to a disconnect, right? That's when you hear people say they grow apart, right? Growing apart happens quite often in marriages more than you realize, but if it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually something's going to have to give, right? Yes. So that leads to checking out. Once you have a partner that checks out, good luck. This is the cost. So it's not as simple as your partner is not listening to you. Something has to be done, guys. Something has to be done about it, right? Another pattern that I've seen with clients, right? One spouse wants open conversation, the other shuts down when the conversation feels overwhelming, right? We call it hard conversations, right? And people that haven't been here, they're very quick to say, hey, you should have hard conversations. Well, hard conversations are tough. They can be difficult, especially from someone that you love, right? So one person experiences silence as rejection, the other experiences the conversation as pressure. Now, both people feel misunderstood, right? Both people, they feel misunderstood. Who's going to break that cycle? Now, I have a client, right? And one spouse processes through open discussion, the other withdraws and shuts down, right? Creating a cycle. Remember, there's a cycle that's being created here. The cycle is being created where she feels unheard while he, his experience is completely different. It's just talk too much, nagging, right? Like, okay, it's the same issue over and over and over and over again. Here's what I want you to understand, guys. People don't feel heard when you can repeat their words, okay? You've heard them over and over again. It's predictable, right? So, but all you said predictably leads to trust. Well, they can trust that you're going to nag tomorrow, so they're not going to listen to you. So context matters, right? People feel heard when you understand their meaning. So if you're trying to be a good communicator, you have to be a good listener. That's how that works. Now, before we end today's session, let's see here. Before we end today's lesson, let me leave you with this. If I've said anything during today's lesson that feels like your marriage, I'm describing your marriage, don't go back to guessing. Every marriage is different. Every relationship has their own history, their personalities, and their blind spots. And that's why I offer a private discovery session. I will spend 1 hour with you. We will look at your specific situation and then identify what's actually happening in your relationship and help you gain clarity on what the next best step is. So if you're ready for that, you simply go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. That's getmymarriageback.com/discovery. The link is also in the description and pinned to the comment. Okay. Now, let me show you what we're talking about. All of this is cute. This is the communication death spiral right here. Not feeling heard, right? You feel ignored, overlooked, dismissed. That leading to you repeating yourself. Now, subconsciously, unconsciously, you're getting louder. You try again, louder this time, hoping to be heard, right? What does that sound like in his ears? It sounds like criticism. Is it your fault? We haven't gotten there yet. Is it his fault? Wait now, relax. Patience is a virtue, right? Frustration turns into blame. That's an anti-seducer. It feels like an attack, right? It leads into sarcasm when you're talking, right? Condescension, condescending tone, right? And of course, that will lead to defensiveness, right? Your partner feels attacked, so naturally they defend themselves because that's your defense. That their defensiveness is also going to feel like an attack on your end as well, right? But generally speaking, they stop listening. They can't hear you. They hear you less. So even though your intention was to feel heard, it's creating the opposite, right? It's creating a direct opposite of what your intentions, what your desire is, right? So of course, both of you shut down and you stop really listening. And of course, that creates distance. Emotional disconnection grows. You withdraw, they pull away, you go silent for another 3 weeks, another 4 weeks, some people for 8 years. Yes, I've heard those before. Right? Sexless marriage. You can't even touch each other because you now live like roommates. And then you call it, you're just there for the kids, right? Of course, resentment, right? And now that the cycle continues, not heard. Eventually, that leads to emotional disconnection. It leads to someone checking out, or worse, you get stuck in a marriage that you really don't enjoy. All of it starts with small missteps, and it creates big distance. Why? Because of meanings, because of emotions, because of interpretations. Well, in my opinion, because of lack of education, because you don't know what you're doing. You lack game. You're trying to use common sense to do marriage, and it doesn't work. Communication is not just about talking, guys. Right? It's about creating safety to be heard without fear. So a lot of this stems down to selfish behavior. It's not always intentional, guys. It's not. Stop thinking intentional. Think more so in the direction of intentionally educating yourself when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? As opposed to common sense is just supposed to carry the whole weight. So again, if today's lessons helped you, I'd appreciate if you would like this video, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and I will definitely see you tomorrow. We'll be back here. We have some more stuff. You see, Lola didn't need me to win the argument that night. That story I told you in the beginning, right? She needed me to hear the fear underneath her words, especially as a pregnant woman. I always tell my brothers, do not offend a pregnant woman. They generally don't forget. Well, women don't forget anything. And but guess what? That's where many marriages break down. Not because nobody is talking. In fact, a lot of time people are doing too much talking and very little listening, right? It's because nobody is hearing the real message. People are hearing their own meanings that's been created from their own emotions, their own interpretation. So I want you to go with this today, right? I want you to keep this at the back of your mind. All this stuff I shared with you, go back and watch this video over and over again, right? If you've been saying the same thing for years and nothing is changing, the issue may not be what you're saying. The issue may be where the message is getting lost. How about that part, right? So the real issue is that most couples never discover where in the chain, in the chain reaction, in this chain that I've shared with you, all this chain that I've shared with you today, they don't really take the time. All it takes is one person to take the time to really go through and find out where the issue is, right? The issue may not be what you're saying, right? It's where the message is getting lost. And that's why generic advice doesn't work, guys. Okay? Most marriages don't end when someone leaves. They end when someone checks out emotionally. Sometimes it's years before they actually pull the trigger. All right? So again, if you're looking for me, just simply go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery, and hopefully you've been enlightened, educated. I will see you fresh early tomorrow. Take care. God bless.
Are you fighting to save a marriage or a relationship, or simply avoiding to end up in a broken or toxic one?
We've been there, and you're in the right place. You see, inside this book, right, you will find and you will discover the secret to save a broken marriage, and you will learn how to build and attract the marriage of your dream.